Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We want to give everybody an opportunity to get their screen set up if you need interpretation. We do have interpreters here. And then we will go ahead and get started. If you could take a moment to just go ahead and add your name and affiliation to the chat. And we'll go ahead and get started with our CalTPA Math and Literacy update for what is coming for the 25-26 year. And we'll start with our staff introductions. I'm Heather Kennedy. I'm one of the consultants with performance assessment. And my main project really for the last 2-3 years has been to work on getting this literacy performance assessment ready for July 1st, 2025 with Senate Bill 488. And we'll talk a lot about that today. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Julie Holmes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Holmes. I'm one of the other consultants on the performance assessment team. I've been mainly supporting with the Gen Ed CalTPA, as well as the PK3 math cycle implementation field test. So it's great to see all of you here today. We have a lot of great information to share, and I'll pass it over to Marissa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Marissa Luna Lopez. I am a consultant here with the CTC and supporting the teacher performance assessments and the CalAPA assessment. And so we do also have our partners from Pearson here. So Lori, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Marissa. Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Thornley. I'm a program manager with Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson. We are the technical contractor for the Commission for Performance Assessment and Examinations. Glad to be here with you today. And I'll pass it over to my colleague, Xavier.
Thank you, Lori. Hello, everyone. My name is Xavier Webb. I'm a Senior Area Director with the Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson. And I also work very closely with Lori and the CTC team on the development and operations of the performance assessments.
Great, thank you. And I think we're ready to go ahead and bring up our slide deck. And we can go ahead and go to our agenda for today. So we are going to be discussing what is coming up for the next academic year, and we'll take you through a draft overview of our math cycle and our literacy cycle. And we'll talk about the legislation, Senate Bill 488, around our literacy cycle, and take a look at our draft TPE matrix, and talk about some program implementation ideas. We do have a Google Drive folder with a few supporting documents for you, including what we've been using in our field tests for backwards planning, some documents around acceptable supports, and some resources around embedding the TPA, and that Google folder link has been put in the chat for you. And we do have some online meeting norms. So we'll have a few pause points for questions throughout today's webinar. We do have quite a large group today. So if you have a question throughout the presentation, you're welcome to put it into the chat. We just might not be able to answer it until we get to those question points. It is helpful to keep questions to a general focus. We know that there are a lot of questions around this transition, and so we will do our best to answer everything we can today. It is helpful to be able to keep your focus on today's webinar so that you can hear all the information presented. We ask that you keep yourself muted until it's time for those question and answer periods. And it is helpful to set your screen to speaker view. We do have our interpreters pinned for accessibility, for the recording, and for today's presentation. So we'll go ahead and talk about some things that are on the horizon for this coming year. And we have some things to share regarding our cycle 1 and 2 transition. And so this is some new information for the field. And for our general education version 7, which is the version that we are in for this operational year, for multiple subject, single subject, and world language, for those candidates who attempt CalTPA's cycle 1 and 2, or 2 by July 3rd, 2025, that's the last submission date for this year, but they don't pass or they receive a condition code, they have the opportunity to resubmit using that version, this 24-25 version, version 7, through June 30th of 2026. So this also, for our multiple subject, single subject, and world language candidates who complete and pass only one of the 2 cycles in the 24-25 version 7 cycles, so this current operational version that we're in, if they complete and pass only one of those cycles prior to July 3rd, 2025, they'll also be allowed to complete that remaining 24-25 version 7 cycle through June 30th of 2026. And then if our multiple subject, single subject, world language candidates do not pass the 24-25 version 7 cycles by June 30th of 2026, that will be the final submission deadline, they will be required to transition to the 26-27 version of the CalTPA. Now, something that's important to point out about the second bullet point there about candidates who've completed and passed only one of the versions is that they could have the option to transition to the new version. It's going to be really a lot of choice for candidates here. And there are specific candidate situations that we'll be happy to help provide guidance and assistance on as we go through this big transition year altogether. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide, which talks about our Ed Specialist candidates, because we also have our operational assessments for mild to moderate support needs and extensive support needs. And these same rules will apply to those versions as well. So candidates who attempt the Ed Specialist TPA cycles 1 and 2 or 2 by July 3rd of this year, but don't pass or receive a condition code, will have that opportunity to resubmit using the current version through June 30th, 2026. Our Ed Specialist candidates who complete and pass only one of the 2 cycles in the current version prior to July 3rd of this year will also be allowed to complete using the current version, the 24-25 version 3 cycles through June 30th of 2026. Again, there could be the option for choice to move it to the new version depending on candidate situation and program. Again, we're happy to talk to you about those specific questions. And then candidates who do not pass for Ed Specialist by that June 30th, 2026 submission deadline will be required to transition to the 26-27 version of the Ed Specialist CalTPA.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, let's transition now. This is Julie, by the way. Let's transition to talking about how cycle 1 will be transitioning to what we will call the math cycle, where we will focus on math instructional work. And this would be applicable to PK3, multiple subject candidates, as well as Ed Specialist candidates, the 5 areas: mild, moderate, extensive support needs, deaf, hard of hearing, early childhood special education, as well as VI. So why is this change happening, if you're wondering? Well, there have been a few legislative changes which you might be aware of. SB 488 restructured the reading competency requirement, and that shifted the RECA assessment into performance assessment. Additionally, the addition of TPE 7, effective literacy instruction for all students, Domain 7 affected all credential areas, as it added additional elements to measure within the performance assessment. So that was a big reason for the change, making cycle 1 math and making what was cycle 2 literacy. So we're going to go over and give you a preview of a draft of the upcoming math cycle. We're looking at the multiple subjects math cycle, and we'll go over a little preview of what can be expected so that you can start to think about upcoming changes for next year for your candidates. So here is a screenshot of the evidence table for Step 1 plan. And in Step 1, what candidates will need to do is, with the guidance and support from their cooperating teacher or their faculty supervisor, they'll gather and review contextual information about their students. They will still select 3 focus students, and we'll go over that in a minute, and develop one asset-based UDL-focused math lesson that includes 2 goals. One being a math content and practice learning goal, and one being a math ALD learning goal. Yes, that is not a typo. That is ALD. That's academic language development. And that's a big change for Cycle 1, is that Cycle 1, we have removed the ELD requirement, and we are focusing in the math cycle on academic language, while the ELD learning goal will be moved to Cycle 2 in literacy, and Heather will talk about that in a few minutes. Then they will provide a rationale for their lesson plan and provide those key instructional materials that support their math lesson plan. So you'll see the structure is very similar to what is currently in place and operational. The evidence that will be submitted, they'll have their Part A, which still remains the contextual information, their Part B, which is their sample math lesson, or if you have in your program and use a locally provided lesson plan, that is fine as well. Just make sure that that aligns to the new requirements of the math cycle. Part C is still the math lesson rationale, and Part D is where the candidate uploads screenshots of their instructional resources and materials. So really, what has changed as we look from the operational to the upcoming math cycle version? The first big change is that it's a math focus. The candidates develop an asset-based, that's cultural and/or linguistic and/or interests, and a UDL-focused math lesson. The ELD requirement is removed for the math cycle. So the previous ELD requirement is replaced with an emphasis on developing related academic language development, ALD, in math specifically. Of course, the focus on math state standards, and this is outlined in the assessment guide. So depending on your candidate's clinical placement, if they're in a preschool or a TK setting, the candidate must use the preschool/transitional kindergarten learning foundations standards. That's the PTKLF. Or if they're in grades K through 12 settings, they will use the California Common Core state standards for math. Another big change is the learning goal will focus on math content as well as the selection of a math practice standard. So when the candidate is creating their learning goals for math, it will integrate both, and both will be required. So this is definitely a big change and something to be reviewing as you look at the PTKLF and as you look at the California Common Core state standards for math. So you'll see that as, for example, if you look at the Common Core state standards, the selection of the math content for the grade level, and then you'll see the selection of one of the 8 math practices. And the math practices do not change. They are aligned between the PTKLF as well as the California Common Core, and there are 8 math practices. So candidates will select both a content and a math practice for their math learning goal. So that is definitely something to be thinking about. And we put some really detailed examples in the upcoming assessment guides. So we give examples on how to write a PK learning goal, how to write a first grade learning goal. And hopefully that those examples are helpful to you in the program as well as your candidates in writing those math practice and math content and practice learning goals. another area of change for step 1. So we made the change from the term class to group because everyone's clinical placement is a little bit different, and this gives a little bit more flexibility to the candidate to work with a group of students versus a whole class. Group meaning 2 or more. The focus student 1 is their English learner. They're planning math adaptations for that child. And there's lots of criteria within the assessment guide. We're being very high level and general throughout this presentation. The focus student 2, they're planning math adaptations for a student who requires additional support in math. If they have an IEP goal in math, that's fine, but it does not have to be a student that has an IEP. So this could be any student who needs additional support in math, has gaps in learning or misconceptions about math. So it's a very flexible choice as well. And for focus student 3, they're planning math adaptations to adapt the environment to support the student's well-being. And again, but this relates to supporting them in math. Everything throughout this assessment is tied to the student's math learning of the content and practices. And again, keep in mind that for all of the 3 focus students, the candidate will need to plan how these adaptations build on the student's assets, their cultural and/or linguistic and/or interests. So you'll see a lot of and/ors there. Again, we're giving lots of candidate flexibility. If they want to focus on a cultural asset, fantastic. If they want to focus on a linguistic asset, absolutely great. Or if they want to focus on a student interest. Anything to where they're building and helping that student and make adaptations for their math learning. All right, let's keep going into step 1. Here are the essential questions. The essential questions are really useful to deconstruct the rubric. And so you will notice in step 1 plan, there are 4 rubrics. Rubric 1.1 is about applying the findings from the recent math information to plan their 1 asset-based UDL-focused math lesson and monitor student progress in a safe and positive environment. So this is a hefty one. It's a big one, but this is all about their planning. Rubrics 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4 are each rubrics focusing on the focus student. So rubric 1.2, I have to point out we have a little flip-flop here. So this is a draft. This is why it's not completely accurate, but 1.2 will actually be the English learner. So if you look at 1.3, so that will be how does a candidate apply recent information to plan adaptations to support their English language development of FS2, Focus Student 2, based on their assets, cultural and/or linguistic and/or interest and learning needs as well. And then 1.3, so we just flip the math learning and the English English language development. So 1.2 will be our English language development, 1.2, yeah, then 1.3. And then 1.4 will be focusing on the well-being to support FS3's well-being of their assets, cultural and/or linguistic and/or interest and learning needs. So we just made a little note in red. So I know that's a little confusing. We're sorry about that. But again, this is a draft. And next we have, and we'll move into step 2. So step 2 is their teach and assess cycle. And this is where they teach and record the entire math lesson. And here's a candidate choice point. They will select between 1 to 3 video clips. And you heard me right. They can select 1, 2, or 3 video clips. This is a candidate choice point, and I'll get into that in a minute. And then they'll provide commentary for what they're doing and why for each of the clips that they are uploading. And the evidence that they will submit will be part E, where they will upload their clip or clips, totaling up to 15 minutes. So again, as I mentioned, this is a choice point. They can select 1 clip that's 15 minutes. They can select 2 clips that are 8 minutes and 1 is 3 minutes. This is really up to the candidate, but we had heard a lot in the field that the 5-minute limit was constraining, and so this hopefully gives a lot more flexibility. We have been field testing this idea, and it has really been successful, so we're putting this in the operational version. And in part F, they will submit commentary. And here's another choice point. So the commentary can be written. It could be verbal, where they are speaking to the camera in an authentic way and they are just communicating verbally their commentary, or it can be in American Sign Language. So again, lots of choice points for candidates depending on their best communication preference. So what has changed in step 2? So again, the option to submit between 1 and up to 3 video clips, totaling no more than 15 minutes. That's a choice point. We are changing from the use of annotations to commentary. And this is just to expand the opportunity for candidates to explain what instructional choices they made and why that they are illustrating in the videos that they are selecting to provide to us. This is just a much more authentic representation of their practice. And again, the commentary can be written verbal or American Sign Language. And something to think about, the candidate will submit clips that reflect the following. These are from the guide. These are the prompts. So they're active math learning of the content and the practice, the math academic language development, and the monitoring of students' math learning. And our essential questions for step 2, there are 2 rubrics in step 2, teach and assess. So thinking about this, how does the candidate create and sustain a safe, positive learning environment and apply those UDL strategies that support their students in making progress towards meeting the math content and practice and the math ALD learning goal? And rubric 1.6, how does the candidate engage students in active, higher order thinking during the math lesson and monitor student learning? So those are the steps in step 2. Moving on to step 3, our reflection step. The candidates will reflect on the effectiveness of their math lesson. What did the students learn? What did you learn about planning and teaching a math lesson? And they will submit part G, that is a written reflection of what they've learned. And what we're really looking for here in step 3, this is a really growth area for candidates across the field. What we're seeing a lot of times in step 3 reflect is they're just giving us a summary again of their lesson and how it went. And we already know that. We already know that through their commentary in step 2, as well as the videos that they've uploaded. So what we're looking for is a deeper reflection of their effectiveness of their math lesson. And it's okay to say what worked and what didn't work. It's not going to ding the candidate. It doesn't have to be a perfect lesson and perfectly effective, and you wouldn't change a thing. I think we all know as educators that we always learn something from when we teach our students, and it doesn't always go the way we anticipated. And so we're looking for that reflection of what was effective and what maybe they would do differently. So what has changed in step 3, reflect for the upcoming math cycle? So asking candidates again to not summarize, but really think about the effectiveness of those adaptations that they created for their focus students 1, 2, and 3 in making progress towards meeting the math learning goal. That includes the math content and the math practice, and really reflect on the effectiveness of their adaptations for FS 1, 2, and 3 to make progress in meeting the math academic language development learning goal. So thinking about the math learning goal and the ALD learning goal as well. And finally, step 4. Oh, I'm sorry, one more. Here's the essential question. So there's 1 rubric in step 3, rubric 1.7. How does the candidate reflect on the effectiveness of their asset-based UDL-focused math lesson in a safe, positive environment? And they're referring back to evidence from step 1, plan, and or step 2, teach and assess. So this is really important. Just an aside, as a program, these are great questions. The essential questions are great ways to, insert into maybe your fieldwork observation, to get candidates thinking and reflecting on the effectiveness if you're asking them to do an asset-based lesson, if you're asking them to do a UDL lesson, if you're asking them to incorporate safe and positive learning into their learning environment. So these are great little precursor ways to start doing the work before they actually begin the CalTPA and thinking about ways to incorporate this into fieldwork observation, for example. And finally, we move into step 4, the apply stage. So what is the apply stage? So we want them to, again, using that data based on what you learned, hopefully they've learned something by completing steps 1, 2, and 3. Now describe what you will do for future math lessons to advance the students' math learning and their math ALD, including their focus students, focus 1, 2, and 3. And candidates will use Part H template, which is, again, a choice point. It can be a written narrative. It can be a verbal where they upload a video, or it can be in ASL, depending on their communication preference. So what has changed for step 4? Not much has changed. Again, a focus on where the candidate is describing future steps to advance the students' learning of math content and their math practice. And again, the same thing, describing future steps to advance the students' learning of their academic language. So you will see that threaded throughout this math cycle, math content and practices, and the math academic language development. And finally, the essential question, there is one rubric in step 4, apply, where the candidate will, how will the candidate apply what they have learned to determine future steps for math content and practice and math academic language development instruction, and they will refer back to evidence from steps 1, 2, and or step 3. And that is a high-level picture of the math cycle. Hopefully that brings you a little bit of relief thinking about what does the future hold. And we wanted to let you know that the math cycle resources, I'm sure you're just dying to get your hands on things, but the materials will be available August 26th. So this summer, we'll be publishing the assessment guides, the templates, and the rubrics. However, those watermark drafts will be available to you at an earlier date. We don't have an exact date. We just know that they will get to you earlier than August 26th. And finally, candidates will be able to register for the new math cycle starting on that August 26th date. So mark that on your calendars. We have some resources to share with you. We have a UDL, CAS 3.0 to share. We have the California Common Core State Standards for anyone in a clinical practice that is grades K up through 12. And we have our preschool PTKLF standards here linked for you, and the executive summary of the math framework as well. And I will pause for questions about the math cycle.
And I think since we're a larger group, it would be helpful if we could use the raise hand feature on Zoom.
That's a great suggestion.
Yes, we will put the Google folder link in the chat again.
We have a question from Sun. Hi, Sun. A general sorry, my chat keeps jumping up and down as new questions come in. Regarding the video, would it be okay to show only a candidate's face, but not the children's face, but the voice of children will be recorded? So yes, that would be okay. And I don't know if that's a PK3 question. But yes, that's okay. You don't need to show the children.
We don't have to see the children's faces either. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like full on. Yeah. Yeah, and Kathleen, we know that the semester begins before then, and which is one of the reasons that we're doing this webinar in February to give you the overview of what's in the field test materials now. And we're doing our best to get the information out there. Like our literacy cycle is currently in a field test right now, and we need to be able to take the data from that field test to be able to inform some of the changes for the operational version to make sure we really have it right. So that's why we are really trying to do this as quickly as we possibly can. And we know that we're running into the beginning of the school year. So we're hopeful to be able to release watermark drafts. That's something we've done in the past prior to that August date. But we're moving as quickly as we can.
Yeah. And Sally asked, will the year 7 materials be available still for candidates who are remediating? So yes,
yes,
it will be available.
Right. See, Ruby had a question. Why will okay, so this is a great question.
Yeah.
Why the ELD standard was removed from cycle 1 if candidates will be supporting English learners? I think so that component has been moved over to the literacy cycle, which we will be going over in the next portion of the presentation. So it wasn't removed completely from CalTPA, it just shifted over. And just to give a little background on the rationale behind that, it has to do with the legislation, Senate Bill 488, and the alignment to the ELA-ELD framework and the requirements around literacy and the recommendations of the literacy design team to have the component embedded there around integrated ELD and the ELD standards and goals.
And Leilena, you asked a question. It's not math cycle specific, but in terms of version to use for next year for single subject candidates, will they also be using version 7 for the 25-26 school year, or will there be a version 8? This is a good question and a little bit more complicated. So we are making alignment across all CalTPAs. So you will see for single subject candidates, there will be alignment with some of the changes we are making specifically around candidate choice, moving from video annotations to commentary. So we will quickly publish those dates as well as soon as we know them.
And yeah, we had some follow-up questions regarding the video and requirements around recording, like number of students, the condition codes. I don't know that we're ready to get into quite all of those details today. And a lot of the condition code questions will be driven, or updates will be driven by the work of the RDI-TPA panel and the decisions that the commission makes around all of that. So I don't know that we can give you specific details about that. And yes, Lori, you're right, that has been given a condition code in the past, but I think there will probably be changes around that type of I can't speak directly to all of the condition codes, but I would expect there will be changes around condition codes based on the work of the RDI-TPA panel. I can't say what specifically at this time, but we would be able to share that information at a later date.
Yes. Thank you all for your questions.
And then Michelle, that's a great question. So will ELD remain in cycle 1 for single subject? So we are in the midst of working on getting everything aligned. I think we're going to be able to share more information regarding single subject and world language at a later date. And we will be doing some type of transition webinar for that group as well. So we're really focused on multiple subject and our ed specialist group today.
And Daryl, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you. Oops, let me get my video on. For students who do not complete RECA before July the 1st, but complete cycle 1, will they be able to use version 7 cycle 1 and the new LPA, or old cycle version 7 and the foundational skills test? Which will be their options, or will they be able to choose?
they will have quite a few options, as it will depend on a few things. And I would kind of have to look at what they did for so if they completed cycle 1 in math this year and they passed RECA, no. Okay. If they completed cycle 1 in math this year, then they would have the ability to do the option to do the new LPA next year and fulfill the literacy requirement.
Or they could do cycle 2, current cycle 2, and the foundational
That's
test.
correct. Yes. So they would have a choice. Yeah.
Perfect answer. Thank you very much.
But they have to have done cycle 1 in math.
And they have to have passed it.
And they have, yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, I think we got through all the questions. Again, keep adding your questions to the chat, but if we want to move on to the transition to the new literacy cycle.
Yes. Okay. So we will be moving on to talking about our transition from cycle 2 to the literacy cycle. Now, this one is really unique in that the literacy cycle is driven by our by the legislation in California called SB 488, Senate Bill 488. And what's really interesting about this bill is that when it called for a literacy performance assessment and all of this work around redeveloping the program standards and the teaching performance expectations for literacy, it required the standards and the TPEs for all of our credential areas, but it didn't require the performance assessment for single subject teachers. So that's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we're talking about this today. So we can go ahead and get into a review of this legislation. And I know this has probably been at the forefront of a lot of your minds, especially this last year, as you have all begun the certification process and submitted all of those materials. But we just wanted to do a quick overview. So just as a reminder, SB 488 directed the commission to redevelop the performance assessments to ensure that we were assessing competence and instruction in literacy, and it very specifically called out evidence-based methods of teaching foundational reading skills, and then went on to define what that meant. And it called out teaching all pupils, including tiered supports for teaching pupils with reading difficulties, English learners. So there's that piece specifically, again, about why the ELD component moved into the literacy cycle as opposed to staying in cycle 1 / the math cycle, and then pupils with exceptional needs. And then it also called for our TPEs to align with the ELA ELD framework. And you will see a lot of that embedded within this work as well. Additionally, there was some very specific language, if we can go to the next slide, around the language for foundational reading skills. You'll see the words organized, systematic, and explicit used a lot in this bill. That language, again, translates over into the performance assessment. You'll also see language about a strong literature, language, and comprehension component with a balance of oral and written language. This really refers to the other themes, the other cross-cutting themes of the ELA ELD framework, and we'll talk about those momentarily. And then there's also language about having the TPEs align with the ongoing diagnostic techniques that inform teaching and assessment, early intervention techniques, and guided practice in a clinical setting, which is where candidates would be completing this assessment. So that is also very important. And all of this aligns with TPE Domain 7. Additionally, the performance assessment has to meet the assessment design standards, and they all have to be ADA compliant, so the assessments are accessible. This is also incredibly important because we have our low incidence communities coming on board with us this next year with our literacy performance assessment, as well as our math cycle for our deaf and hard of hearing ed specialist candidates and our VI ed specialist candidates. So this is really critical. And then they also have to provide convincing evidence of a teacher's knowledge, skills, and abilities in relation to the TPEs for their credential areas. So one of the really critical pieces in this bill that started all of this work with the literacy performance assessment was aligning with the ELA-ELD framework. And this has been in place since 2014. So it's been around for quite some time, but it's always good to go back and take a look at this. And this is, I think, one of the most helpful graphics when you're trying to kind of wrap your head around all these different parts and pieces of the ELA-ELD framework and how this relates to the standards, the Common Core ELA literacy standards, and then the ELD standards. So this is called the circles of implementation. And this graphic comes from the California Department of Education and the ELA-ELD framework. And you'll see that there are those 5 little circles that are in the white space in the middle. And those are the 5 cross-cutting themes of the ELA-ELD framework. And foundational skills is one that is sort of pulled out and called out separately in the literacy cycle. And that's because it's called out separately within the legislation. And so foundational skills is one of the 5 cross-cutting themes, but it's really sort of called out and pulled out separately. And that's because it's addressed in that direct, systematic, explicit instruction. And so the other 4 themes are meaning making, effective expression, language development, and content knowledge. So what's really important here is that these themes are interconnected, and they are interconnected with those 4 strands of the ELA literacy Common Core state standards. And those strands are reading, writing, speaking, and listening. That's one strand together, and language. And with the parts of the ELD standards, which are interacting in meaningful ways, learning about how English works, and using foundational skills. And so all of these are defined within the TPEs. So you'll actually notice that if you look at the titles of each of the 5 cross-cutting themes, that they align directly to a TPE in Domain 7 for each credential area. So there is a TPE for foundational skills. There's a TPE for meaning making, for effective expression, for language development, and so on and so on. And so that's just something to keep in mind when you're going through all of this. So in the literacy cycle, candidates must demonstrate evidence of their ability to teach foundational reading skills, and one additional theme from the ELA-ELD framework, and it's the candidate's choice. And they also need to be able to include integrated ELD instruction. And the role of the ELD standards, if we could go to the next slide, is to amplify the instruction of any content standard that they're paired with. In this case, it's the relationship between the ELA literacy standards and the ELD standards. So their job is to amplify those standards. It's there to be there in a supportive role. And if you look at the ELD standards, they do a really nice job of showing the relationship between the ELD standard and the selected ELA literacy standard. So that's a really nice way to show the connection between the two. And it's a really natural, organic relationship for the candidates to have within their planning of the literacy cycle. So to just kind of recap those last 2 slides, if we could go to the next one, candidates are planning for foundational reading skills and one or more of the additional themes from the ELA-ELD framework: meaning making, effective expression, language development, content knowledge. So again, they have choices there. In the course of our pilot for literacy, we had a lot of questions around foundational reading. Do we have to teach all the foundational reading skills? What do we do for students who are in older grades? Our Ed Specialist credentials span from TK into adult programs for students who access services until they're 22. They have to demonstrate a skill that's appropriate, a foundational reading skill that's appropriate for the students that they're working with, for the part of the school year they're in, the prerequisite skills the students already have. There's a great resource guide that's linked in the presentation, and we're going to upload the presentation to the Google folder after our presentation today. This resource guide was written by the authors of the ELA-ELD framework, and it corresponds to what's in the framework. And there's a great chart in here that goes along with the standards for the grade levels. Because foundational reading standards stop in grade 5 in California, but foundational reading doesn't stop, right? This doesn't mean students don't need to learn it past that point, and it doesn't mean that they're not still working on some of those skills. And so there's a great chart in there that's really helpful that talks about how in the language standards and in other places, those things are still being worked on. And it's really, really helpful. And then there's also the ELA ELD framework itself. The document as a whole is very lengthy, but what's really great are the grade level range chapters. So if you are working with a candidate who's placed in 8th grade, you could go to the chapter that covers that grade range, and they give examples for each of the 5 themes for those grade levels and talk about what instruction looks like for meaning making in 5th grade, in kindergarten, in 12th grade. And it's really helpful. And then there's the standards themselves. And I'll actually put the link to what's called the white paper in the chat right now, just because I think that that's a really critical document. And it's been super helpful to anybody who has been participating in the pilot or the field test. Like, that's been a go-to for everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and pause for questions right now, because I know that's a lot of kind of front loading how we got here, what we're doing with the content of the assessment, and then I'll actually go into the same type of presentation Julie did around the evidence table and what's changed. I did get a question about the literacy assessment being embedded into the TPA. So there's so many things happening with literacy, and it's a lot to sort of keep track of. So RECA is what candidates are taking now, and that is what is going to be sunsetting and going away. Foundations of Reading is a standalone exam that candidates will be able to take if they need access to an exam because there's a set of criteria that the commission has set forth in an item that they adopted last year. But there are a number of reasons they may need to access an exam. But for most candidates, what they will need to do is take a literacy performance assessment, which is for the commission's model for CalTPA is embedded into the literacy cycle. So Foundations of Reading is separate from the literacy cycle, and it will meet the requirement in a different way for candidates who meet certain specific criteria to qualify to take that exam. Any other questions before we get into the content of Shannon? I see your hand is up, and then Stephen.
Okay, I'm gonna ask this one more time. And everyone, there's so many people on here. I'll make it super quick. So new candidates coming in will have to take the math cycle and the literacy cycle and the standalone test because the RECA will no longer be in effect. Am I understanding that piece the end, or am I inserting the wrong thing at the end?
If you stopped after take the literacy cycle, you would be correct that if they take the math cycle and the literacy cycle, they will meet the performance assessment requirement and the literacy requirement in Senate Bill 488.
So I don't need to worry about the foundations.
So it's embedded into the performance assessment now. So it's like they're basically getting like a 2-for-1 deal on literacy.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah.
I thought it was a 2-for deal. So I was like, hey, they're kind of lucky in a sense.
Right. It sounds a little too good to be true, right?
Right. So I better just mute myself and let's just keep on rolling. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. I see Stephen's hand and then Anne Marie.
Hey, Heather, how you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Okay, so it's good to know that like everybody is in like the same, like I have to stop and pause when I'm explaining this whole LPA RECA thing because I thought it was just me. Now, insert Foundations of Education. Is there going to be specific guidance about who will be taking that or who that will be available to coming out from the CTC anytime soon? Because I know that while I'm not talking about it yet, my interns are very resourceful and they will find out before I tell them.
Yes, they like to Google things.
Yes.
Yeah, so I will see if when I am off the presenter seat, if I can track down the criteria that they set for the foundations of reading, but I will need to be off the presenter side, and that's going to be a little while. So but I will be happy to look for that in about 20 minutes for you all.
Right on.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I see there's some questions in the chat. I'm following those. I will get to you all in just a second. Anne-Marie.
Awesome. Thank you. So it's similar to Stephen. I feel like some of our interns are really trying to analyze the situation to like take the like route of least resistance when it comes to this. So we have instructed our interns who are currently in a TPA seminar course right now to take the math TPA so that when they're doing cycle 2 next year, they can take the literacy TPA. So for that cohort, I think I'm just processing out loud and making sure I'm right, similar to what Shannon did.
Sure.
So for that cohort, they would not need to take the RECA because the literacy TPA will be addressed in cycle 2 in the fall.
That's correct.
Okay. So if we had people who are year 2 interns who completed cycle 2 this past fall, they would need to have taken the RECA then, because they would have already done the old literacy TPA and the math TPA.
Yes. And they would
Okay.
be completing this year?
Yes.
Yes. So if they
Yeah.
wanted to be recommended and they're completing this year, then yes, that's what they would want to do.
Okay. And in the case that maybe, yeah, that group would have will need to still continue to pass the RECA. Or is it one of those things where it's like, come July 1, nobody can take the RECA? Well, no, you just said there's certain people.
Right. So that's why the commission adopted
Okay.
foundations of reading, because there will always be groups and actually I outsmarted myself and I bookmarked that PSA.
Oh, perfect.
Because so in the chat it goes about who can take foundations of reading, because there's always there's people who were prepared in another country and they have to demonstrate literacy and things like that. And so there's always going to be situations in which someone is going to need an exam to demonstrate that versus a performance assessment. So that's why the commission adopted a standalone exam versus just going with the performance assessment route. So
sorry, this will be my last. I'm using language RECA. You're using language of foundations. Is it a different written test? Or
it is because so Senate Bill 488 actually called for the RECA to
expire,
being administered on June 30th of 2025.
So either way, people are taking a new exam, whether it's the performance one or this new assessment.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I am going to go back through the chat. So there was a question. So Pat, that's a great question about official communication. Yes. So a PSA is in the works and we are going to get that out as soon as it goes through all of the official processes. And there was a request to go back and review a few slides. I just need to know which ones. And we are going to go through a lot of what was in there again, as far as the content of the assessment. So that is not the only time you're going to see what is required of candidates in the literacy cycle. I have so much more to tell you about it. I'm really excited because this has been all of my work for the last almost 3 years. I put the link for the PSA in the chat. There's a great question about the secondary passing standard. Thank you, Julie, for putting that PSA in there. And yeah, we're going to have to take a proposal to the commission about passing standards for these new assessments. And so we will just have to see what the commission has to say. It's all up to them. And if they do not take RECA prior to its sunsetting, they will have a choice. They could take the standalone assessment. They could take Foundations of Reading. They could also take the literacy performance assessment. I guess it would just really be up to the candidate. They just need to find a way to meet that requirement. And let's see. I think, Bev, I'm going to get back to you on your question. And I'm not sure if I understand your question about the video portion.
Oh, so I was just looking at the link that you had shared, and on there it says, do I need to pass all 3 RECA written examination subtests and the video assessment? And so it says you have to by 2025, and it said either pass all 3 or passing the video. So I just wasn't clear what that means.
Yeah,
is it one or
the other? Yeah.
Okay. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. And then also, I just wanted to, Julie had asked about, I just wanted to be clear on the part because it's still a little muddy to me. So if they so currently, you know, we have folks that are in the cycles. If they attempted the RECA but did not pass the RECA, then next year, their only option is the Readings Foundation standalone assessment, correct?
They could take the literacy cycle if they wanted to. It's their choice.
Okay. And then what if they didn't attempt it at all before July 1st?
If they didn't attempt the RECA?
Then would they be held to, did they still have the option of either one or the other, or do they have to redo the current cycle? Or do the current cycle that goes into effect July 1st?
If they didn't attempt the RECA, or they didn't
at
attempt
all.
the cycle?
The RECA.
Let's see. I have to think through this. I'm sorry. There's so many different.
So many scenarios.
I'll give you a little more context. Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit more context. We have one of the programs I support, we have teaching residents who are currently doing their student teaching and then working on they have several tests that they're trying to complete, their CSET, their TPA and RECA. And so those who are in a place where they're like, okay, what can I prioritize? You know, we definitely say CSET because you're not going to be able to even be intern. But I'm just wondering, in that situation, should they focus on the TPA cycles right now? Should it be RECA?
So there's a lot of different answers for this.
Yeah.
But after really, truly, it's going to be up to the individual candidate themselves where they are in their program. But what's going to be available is the Foundations of Reading exam and the LPA. And so depending upon where someone is, what their priorities are, how they're working their way through their program, because a lot of programs are 1-year programs. They get done in, you know, one space. But if they have a spring admit, right, and you do cycle 1 in the spring of like right now, then the fall they would do the LPA, right? And then that would meet the literacy requirement as well as the cycle 2 requirement. If you have a 3-year program, someone may wait and do assessments in a different space. So, but the big thing is RECA sunsetting on a certain date, and then what's available is going to be the LPA and the Foundations of Reading exam for the folks who meet the specifications outlined by the commission. And so you might have a candidate who completed cycle 1 in math and cycle 2 in literacy and has not met the requirements for RECA and is not meeting the requirements for Foundations of Reading. And so, you know what? I did a really great job on that cycle 2. I'm going to go back and redo cycle 2 with literacy in the fall, and that'll meet my literacy requirement. They can do that. The candidate can do
great.
that. That's a choice
I like
point.
that.
And that's what's so good about this, because a lot of candidates can really shine in showing what they know by teaching through a performance assessment rather than going and taking a computer-based test or the video RICA that's available now. So there's a lot of choice points around this, and it's a weird, like, we couldn't even make a flow chart really because there's so many different scenarios and circumstances, and I think and I know there's so many questions, but we do have a literacy at is it at ctc.ca.gov email address. If you have any one of those, like, very specific scenarios, please send them our way so that way we can email you back, or even meet with you to talk through some of these so we can make sure to get your specific questions answered. Does that help?
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. And then do you mind just putting that email address into the chat as well?
Yeah, I just put it in
Okay,
there.
thank
So
you.
yeah, definitely
Very
if you
helpful.
have specific scenarios, we'll help you work through them because yes, as Marissa said, we like to call this like the choose your own adventure part of the TPA experience with this next transition year. And we really, I think there are infinite outcomes at this point. Like we have yet to make, like we couldn't even do like a flow chart, or there's so many different unique experiences for candidates and programs and pathways to all of this, that we just want to make sure that we're giving you the most up-to-date and accurate information we can. So, please reach out if you have specific candidate questions about this, this candidate is in this situation, because we want to make sure that we're helping you guide them through all of this. I think I'll go ahead and start going through the literacy cycle, and we have more time for questions embedded. So we will definitely pause and be able to answer more, but I want to make sure that you get to hear what's in the literacy cycle as well. So I know there's a lot to cover here. Okay. So we'll talk through the candidate evidence. So this is what used to be, or what is currently cycle 2. So in step 1 of the literacy cycle, candidates are working with their cooperating teacher, their supervising faculty, and they're reviewing literacy assessments that are recent for the students in their clinical practice. They'll also look at screenings. So this is very timely, as the state of California has just adopted, I believe it was 4 screenings for literacy to be used. So school districts are going to be adopting at a local level the screener or screeners that they're going to want to start using for the next academic year. So this is great for candidates because they are going to have access to all this data. And they can also look at literacy and language profiles and other information for the students they're working with in clinical practice. And they're going to select one focus student. And they're going to collect some contextual information for their students, including the focus student. And they're going to describe their 3 to 5 literacy lessons and their corresponding assessments that include the selected foundational reading skills and the selected additional theme or themes from the ELA-ELD framework. And so candidates in step 1 submit their contextual information, their learning segment, their description of their assessments, and a description or a blank copy of the summative assessment and the rubric or performance criteria. So we'll talk through what's changed in step 1. So candidates are now looking at recent assessment information. That's not something candidates currently do in cycle 2. And cycle 2 doesn't currently have a focus student, but now it does. And so candidates are selecting one focus student. There are specific choices for each credential area that are some very unique to the specific credential for the ages and for ed specialists for disabilities served by the credential. But essentially, they are looking at either students who are an English learner, who might have a literacy-related disability, or who might need some additional support with making progress towards meeting the ELA literacy standards, or who specifically might need some experience, some additional support around the foundational reading skills for their grade level. So there's also a streamlined learning segment template that includes integrated ELD. Candidates are also now going to notice that there's or programs really will notice some language shifts. So cycle 2 right now talks about formal and informal assessment. If we could go to the next slide. And we've now aligned our language to other state documents like the ELA-ELD framework and the California Dyslexia Guidelines, and our terminology now aligns with their language with formative and summative assessments. We've streamlined our questions around those assessments. Candidates are no longer submitting copies of the formative assessment, and there's no candidate choice around the use of self-assessment and rubrics. They could also submit performance criteria. And in step 1, there are 2 rubrics, and we have our essential questions. So we're looking at candidate planning using student assets, how they're including assessments and creating that progression of learning, and addressing the ELA literacy and ELD goals. And then we're also looking at how is the candidate applying those findings from those recent assessments to plan for those foundational reading skills using that direct, systematic, and explicit approach. And then planning for the additional themes from the ELA-ELD framework to use integrated ELD to support their students' literacy and language development. Then we head into step 2, and the candidate will teach their series of 3 to 5 lessons and video record, and they'll also conduct their assessments. Then they go back and select their video clips and provide commentary. And again, you'll notice that flexibility for their video clips. They submit their video clips. They're allocated 20 minutes of video between 1 and 4 video clips. And they're also using commentary instead of annotations here. It can be written or video, and they have that choice here as well. So what's changed here in step 2 from cycle 2 to moving into the literacy cycle is that there's video clip choice. So instead of having the requirement for 4 video clips of up to 5 minutes each, candidates have choice. They can submit 1 continuous clip of 20 minutes if they feel like they've hit all those things they need to hit in that 20 minutes, or they can have 2, 3, or 4 videos, and they can allocate the length in any way they want up to 20 minutes. They're focusing on the selected foundational reading skills, the instruction in the selected additional theme or themes, formative assessment, adjusting instruction, and integrated ELD. The requirement around the self-assessment and ed tech videos has been removed. Again, the move from annotations to commentary. So there's an expanded opportunity for candidates to explain their instructional choices and the choice around written or video commentary. And that piece around the analysis of formative assessment, where they had that additional document, I think it's part H in cycle 2 right now, has been removed. It's sort of combined with the commentary with the way that it's the prompts are written right now, but that is no longer a piece of evidence in step 2. And there are 4 rubrics in step 2 and 4 essential questions. So the first rubric is really around that foundational reading skills piece and that direct and explicit approach. The rubric 2.4 is looking at that instruction and the additional theme and the use of integrated ELD. Rubric 2.5 is the use of assessment to monitor and adjust instruction. And rubric 2.6 is the use of specific actionable feedback. So heading into step 3, reflect. Candidates will engage the students in the summative assessment. and they are going to score and determine the student progress. They analyze the summative assessment and reflect on their students' progress, and they provide their students with feedback. And they're going to submit their focus students' summative assessment response and their scored rubric or performance criteria, and they also submit the focus students' feedback that they provided to the focus student. And they reflect on their students' progress and the effectiveness of their literacy instruction. And then in step 3, they submit the focus student's summative assessment response and that scored rubric or performance criteria. They submit the feedback that they provided to the focus student, which should be actionable. And they also submit their reflection and the analysis of the summative assessment results. So what's changed from cycle 2 into the literacy cycle is that they're analyzing and reflecting on the group's responses and the focus student's individual response for the summative assessment. You won't see that whole class assessment table of the results that currently exists in cycle 2. The language has been adjusted to focus on understandings, gaps in knowledge, and/or misconceptions of the students. And rather than submitting those 3 student responses that represent exceeding the standards, meeting the standards, and not yet meeting the standards, they're only submitting the focus student response. Moving into step 4, apply. Candidates are still planning a reteach or an extension activity, but they're focusing on the focus students' literacy development. They video record the follow-up activity and they provide commentary. And so then the candidate is going to submit the description of that reteach or extension activity, the video clip, and the commentary that goes along with that video clip. So what's changed in step 4 is that they are planning specifically for the focus student in step 4. With the option to include additional students if they want to, who require similar support to progress towards their ELA literacy and ELD goals. There's been some redefining around reteach and extension. So with reteach, it's to focus on targeted intervention or individualized strategies for the focus student, or for extension to focus on deepening or advancing their learning in relationship to the ELA literacy and ELD goals. The activity description's been streamlined, and again, there's that option for the written or video commentary. And in step 3, there is one rubric looking at how the candidate's able to identify student understandings, gaps in knowledge or misconceptions, provide feedback, and determine the effectiveness of their instruction and what changes they might make if they taught this learning segment again. And we also have one rubric in step 4, apply, which is applying their analysis of assessment results to plan, explain their rationale for, and teach their follow-up activity. And we'll go ahead and take some questions. I see some have come in through the chat. And thank you, Marissa and Julie for covering some of those. So we have a question about ELD being a specific focus in cycle 2, and if they're required to include ELD standards and goals. So yes, ELD is now a specific focus in the literacy cycle 2, and they are required to include ELD standards and goals. And that is regardless of whether or not they have a student who is an English learner in their group or class or not. And that is based around the legislation for Senate Bill 488 and the alignment to the ELA-ELD framework. It is not an ELA framework and then an ELD framework. It is written as one combined. And so the way that was written, and the advisement of the design team was that it be a requirement regardless, and that they be able to include those strategies and planning in the literacy performance assessment, even if there are not English learners within their group or classroom. There is a question about the minimum number of students for the 3 to 5 lessons. So that is a tricky question because it really is dependent upon the credential area. And we have been busy at work on this literacy design team that's been meeting over the last 2 years, making 7 unique versions of this assessment for PK3, multiple subject, and the 5 ed specialist credentials that all have their own unique version of this. So it varies based on the credential area. So I don't know how to answer that question without knowing your credential area that you're asking about. So if you, Erin, want to let me know which credential you're asking about, I can answer your question. And then I think I just answered the next question about if there's going to be separate versions. So yes, Carissa, there will be separate versions. Oh, Lori, that's such a great question. Okay, I'm so glad you asked this. I'm really excited you asked this question, actually. How will this be supported for those students in dual immersion candidates and 90-10 environments in particular? I'm so glad you asked this because we have definitely been working on this with our design team. We have some members who are really active in the bilingual community. And I'm really excited because we had pilot participants and we have field test participants who are in 90-10 environments and in dual immersion programs. And so this is something we've been really closely looking at. And so I probably will not cover all of this right now, but I'm going to do my best. So they are able to use the Spanish language development and the Spanish Common Core state standards for literacy in lieu of the ELA literacy and ELD standards in their learning segment if they are providing instruction in Spanish in their learning segment. If they're providing instruction in English, then they should use the ELA literacy and ELD standards. They can submit quite a bit in the language of instruction. I need to pull the resources around it, but there are only maybe 1 or 2 things that have to be submitted in English, and I cannot recall off the top of my head which item it is. It aligns pretty closely with the current requirements around bilingual submissions that are on the Commission's website. So if you are familiar with those, it'll correlate pretty closely with those. Yes, and I know that we have many other languages, and unfortunately, there are not other state documents published for Chinese language development standards or Common Core state standards in those languages. So we are still working on solutions for those areas. They can still film in the language of instruction and all of those things, but we don't have standards that are unfortunately produced and adopted by CDE at this time. So hopefully we'll get there, right? That's the hope. And if and when we do, we'll definitely make sure that we align with those areas. But language of instruction is in place regardless. So in the pilot, we had candidates submit in Spanish and in ASL. So those were the 2 areas we were able to study. And they are always scored by calibrated assessors who are fluent in the language of instruction. So we were really fortunate to be able to take a look at that. And then we are going to continue to take a look at what we get back in the field test, and then we'll continue to refine that. We've also been in close conversations with CalTPA over their feedback around this area, and we'll probably go back to them again after the conclusion of the field tests to be able to talk to them a little bit more about what else we can do in this area. But we're definitely excited because dual immersion programs are on the rise, which is great. So we want this to be something that candidates can complete in those settings. So hopefully that answered your question to the best that I can answer it right now. And okay, for multiple subject, the minimum number of students. So it's This sounds so silly, but students is plural, right? So it's more than one. So 2 or more. It's a literal interpretation. And let's see. We're going to be talking about single subject in another webinar. Today's really focused on multiple subject and mild, moderate, and extensive support needs. Okay, great question for a dual immersion candidate. So there is, I will put the link in the chat in just a minute. There is something on the commission's website about guidance for candidates who are in bilingual placements right now. It will be updated when we move over to literacy and math cycles, but it's the guidelines for cycle 1 and cycle 2 about what can be submitted in English and what can be submitted in the language of instruction.
These are great questions. Thank you for everyone for kind of pushing the conversation along.
All right.
Okay, so we can kind of briefly kind of touch upon the TPEs that are being measured in the math and the upcoming literacy cycles. This is just more for your information. Again, this is just a draft. And, you know, the math cycle will measure selected TPE elements between 1 through the additional domain 7. So again, this is just for your information, and this is looking at the multiple subjects draft of the math cycle. This is just more informational than anything else. And again, the TPEs are published in the assessment guide, and they follow each rubric. You can see the exact TPE elements that will be measured.
And we have a similar slide for literacy. And we often get questions about the candidate option because that's something that's a little bit different. Those elements 6, 7, 8, and 9 are the elements for the additional themes from the ELA ELD framework. So the candidate is not going to be able to teach all of those within their 3 to 5 lessons. They get to choose. So that's why it's the candidate option. It's the option of which additional theme they get to choose. So if they choose to focus on meaning making, we would be measuring that element. Or if they choose content knowledge, it would be that element.
Okay, well, that was a whole lot of information, and I'm sure that you have like a ton of questions and things spinning around in your head. And so what we're going to talk about next is how can I embed this in my program? What does my program, what will it look like? And I'm the newest member of the team here. This time last year, I was directing a program out of a county office of education that supported multiple subject candidates and education specialist interns. And so that's what I would have been thinking watching this, being like, what classes are going to have to change? What things am I going to have to do? How is this going to work? So let's dive in. Next slide, please. So program standard 5B, candidate preparation support. This is what's in the program standards now. This is what we are all doing, right? Your program is providing multiple formative opportunities for these candidates to prepare for the teacher performance assessment tasks and activities. As the coordinator for an intern program, when candidates came to me in pre-service, they had assignments that they had to do that were alike a TPA. They had to talk about assets and needs in a class. They had to do observations and use a template where they took some notes that was alike to a teacher performance assessment. So I embedded that piece in that space. In their clinical practice, they used a TPA alike measure to go through and do their 12 observations per year. And if they were doing a TPA, I took one of those observations out and inserted the TPA in there. So they weren't having to do 12 observations plus the TPA stuff. So there were multiple opportunities for them to do these things. and these tasks, so they got a lot of practice. So by the time they got to TPA, it wasn't the first time they're trying to set up a camera and record their class. And also providing candidates with timely feedback on these formative assessments. Someone was there in their space, either via video or in person, talking about what these candidates are doing to be an excellent teacher, but this person was also informed of what they would have to do to show that, demonstrate that in a teacher performance assessment. So we always made sure that these things were in place. Next slide, please. So embedding the math and literacy cycles into your program faculty and other educators like cooperating teachers, they are the key folks to guide and support candidates through these two cycles. And they should be absolutely looking at their documents, talking about these practices with them, and facilitating and coaching, right? We don't want someone to do this for someone else, but there's no way that someone who is a brand new beginning teacher will be successful without the support and help and conversations that a faculty mentor or a cooperating teacher would have. I just think back to my recent work at UC Davis. I had a chair for my dissertation, and we talked a lot. And we went back and forth and had these conversations, and I went and tried something and I brought it back to her. She looked at it and gave me some feedback, and then I went and worked on it and came back to her. At no point did she write my dissertation for me, but she gave me so much coaching, so much support, so much help that it came out to be what I could do. And that's what we want, is for these candidates to teach this class with guidance and support of these educators. Next slide, please. So embedding these math and literacy cycles in the program, read their submissions. Yes, you can read them. Please do. Make them an assignment in the class. Have them turn it in. Watch their videos. Have them watch each other's videos. Have them talk about what you did here. Why did you do this? Discussing the work with coaching strategies again, talking through these things, talking to candidates, asking them questions. What do you think? Most of the time, when someone asks, what do you think of this? They already have an idea of what they think, and they're getting confirmation, or maybe they're really, concerned or confused. And your candidates. You know your candidates the best, and you know the context of this. So you, as faculty mentors, cooperating teachers, you folks will be the best people at supporting these candidates through this performance assessment. Reviewing analytic rubrics. In this whole presentation, one of the first things I caught on when a while ago, when I was like, what the heck is commentary versus an annotation? Okay, for those of you that are doing that and didn't want to ask for, it's a template, and you're going to write down what happened, say at this point in this video, so instead of having to go into the little e-portfolio and click on something and a drop down and putting in something and those little diamonds that they have to drag along the bottom, they're not doing that anymore. They're just putting in a video, and then they're going to get a template, and they're going to list things by time on a document. But explaining those things to candidates, it demystifies so much. And I had a math teacher that I was watching one time, and he said, inch by inch, math is a cinch, right? And so that's what this all is. It's step by step, leading someone through. And it's amazing what someone will come out with on the other end when you support them properly, and when they'll be able to be proud of that work. And using those rubrics in coursework to help guide this discussion. What does this rubric mean? A 3 on this rubric means we met the teacher performance expectations, right? A 2 is we tried. A 1 is it's just not there. A 4, we exceed, so we do all of this plus this. And a 5 is all of this plus this plus this. And I had candidates in my program who truly misunderstood an analytic rubric. They thought they could get a 2.5. I'll just do everything except for this piece right here. I'll be okay. No, it's all of this, or it's down here. And just understanding that, it was such a big a big thing. Personally, I had to go take the Miller's Analogies test when I was going into my master's program. And the first time I did really badly on that assessment because I didn't understand the format. I didn't understand that this was this, and I didn't understand that it was me, timed and all this. And the second time I went, it was a much better reflection of my knowledge, but because I had that understanding of the assessment. And that's what you can do is unlock, demystify, support folks through this, because a lot of this is stuff that they know how to do and they have been doing. It's just in perhaps a different form, something that's, and really it shouldn't be, because it should be something they've been doing all along and they're used to the form. So most definitely include a lot of that and many opportunities for folks to talk to one another, to talk to cooperating teachers, and to talk to you. I used to, even as a faculty member, I would have 2 sessions, when it was time to submit, where I would just do office hours, and I would schedule office hours with candidates to meet with them one-on-one or in groups of 2 to be able to go through these and to give them that really good specific feedback, and canceling class for a couple of weeks to do that, so folks could work and could get some one-on-one time with me. So however you're planning to address this, just make sure that it's, humane, candidate first, and we want everybody to be successful. Next slide, please. Providing clarity. I think I spoke to that a little bit, just making sure that folks don't just go and just turn it in and roll the dice and hope it lands on, red. We really should know that we're going to submit a passing first best submission, because we've gone through this document, we've looked at the rubrics and said, this is how it's met every single one of these pieces. And if you have candidates, help each other go through the rubrics, turn those rubric constructs into questions. How did I submit? How did I create a manageable learning goal? How did I have students demonstrate integrated ELD? Well, here I can point to this evidence. If they can point to evidence in writing or in video or in commentary, however best a candidate can best express what they know, how they can show what they know, that's what we're looking for. And one piece of evidence that meets a construct is enough for the construct. They don't have to put it in 15 times. They just need to make sure it's in the right places, because at the bottom of each rubric, it says where that evidence can come from. And paying attention to that is key as well. The glossary, aligning the use of vocabulary, with working with adults, one thing that I have really learned is there's one thing that we say, there's things we say, and then there's what others understand, right? And we want to make sure that we're speaking the same language. I was in London with my son not too long ago. We asked the security guard for a trash can, and he looked at me and said, a rubbish bin? I said, no, man, I want a trash can. But we were talking about the same thing, and it took me a moment to realize that. But truly, if that glossary, that common language, it was important. Encouraging candidates to engage in professional writing. This was something I had as an English teacher with 8th graders that used to like to put, BRB in their essays. I don't know. I was like, come on, guys. I thought I was going to fight against contractions. I didn't realize I was fighting against text language as well. But a lot of times, folks, they really do need to understand this is formal writing. We need to be professional about it. And there are a lot of resources, especially on campuses, tutoring centers, spaces like that, that would absolutely love to engage with your candidates. So one thing that I did when I was at UC is I made an appointment with the tutoring center, and I explained just in a nutshell kind of what this is. And so when a candidate would come with their submission, the person that was there would know what it was, be like, I have no idea what this thing is, and I have no idea what you're supposed to do. They actually had a decent understanding of what the assessment was, and so the candidates could get that support for their writing. Again, it's not someone doing it for them, it's someone looking at what they've written and making sure that it's clear. And sometimes when we look at our own work, we think, oh, sure, that's clear. I'll watch this video and think, oh my gosh, that's terrible the way I spoke because it was so unclear. Really, what we understand, you need that other backboard of someone else to bounce things off of. And that's what writing support can do. And there are a lot of online supports as well for folks, but just making sure that they spell check their work. It can get distracting when things are just jumbled and all over the place. Next slide, please. This is an excellent activity for folks to do. My sister-in-law is going to be getting married in June, and we're starting to backwards map that thing, right? Where's the venue? Where's, all these different pieces. And this is, I actually do this with candidates, and I would have them draw a picture of themselves, like when they had their credential and how they were going to feel. And then we would make a little timeline of like where I am now and how long I have, and then all the things I have to do along the way, and use their course of study to outline where they need to go. And that celebratory, I have my credential, I have my first job, it was an excellent thing to do. This is a nice backwards map for programs and for candidates, and it's editable, and I believe it's in the Google folder. Yep. And you can use this in your program to support candidates as they go through so they can check the boxes. And for someone that has, I love checking a box. It's so nice. You give yourself a 30-minute break after checking the first box, right? No, but truly, going through and checking these boxes, making sure that you're staying on target to finish with your cohort, because I think that's the struggle. Folks always think, if I could just get through this week, I'll have more time next week. We never have more time next week. It's never a better time. You just got to do it, right? And so putting things off for tomorrow, not always the best. So using this backwards mapping is a helpful way to keep candidates and program on track to make sure everybody is finishing. Next slide, please. So there are some required supports that programs you must provide. Handbooks, explanatory materials, any way that you can explain the teacher performance assessments to candidates are always helpful. I did a lot of videos when I was a TPA coordinator. I do a Zoom by myself because I can laugh even if I'm alone. I'd put the document up on the screen. I'd turn my face off so they wouldn't see my hair going like this, and I'd just record my voice, and I would talk through all these different pieces, and I'd push it out as pre-work. So the candidate would listen to it for maybe 5 minutes of what we're going to talk about in class, and I'd say, everybody come with a question, because that's what I want to start with. We want to start with questions and answers based on this piece. So having access to the handbook, recording myself. Also, I would make that accessible to cooperating teachers who were like, I never had to do a teacher performance assessment. I don't know how to help anybody. Well, do you know how to write a lesson? Well, yeah. Do you know how to engage kiddos in higher order thinking? Well, of course, that's what I do every day. Well, how about while you're teaching, do you know how to know if the kids know the stuff? Well, yeah, I walk around and I monitor them and I ask them questions. Oh my goodness, you guys just got through step 2 of the steps of the CalTPA. That's amazing. I know you could do it. It's just demystifying the whole it's an assessment thing. So truly making sure that these videos, they helped those folks, they helped the candidates, they kept people on track. Explaining the TPA tasks and scoring rubrics, talked about that, briefly, but truly going through and just how the stuff works is so important. Formative experiences. I talked about a few formative experiences that candidates did. And I go back to my own education. These, writing one chapter at a time, one piece at a time, getting feedback, making it better. Those are what we are asking candidates to do. And that's what they should be doing when they do those 12 observations over the arc of their program. And for those of you that are working with interns, you may have 2 years, 3 years of observations that you have opportunity to have candidates practice for this. Providing candidates who are not successful with additional support. Hopefully we never have to do that, right? Our first submission is our best submission, is our only submission. But unfortunately, there are circumstances where a candidate did not meet the minimum requirements of the assessment. It needs to be targeted, it needs to be focused. And if you don't understand, you get the score report, you're not sure what it means, what, if there was a condition code or something of that nature, please do contact us and either the folks at Pearson that can give you a more detailed description of what happened, or any one of us at the email addresses that we will list in this presentation. Happy to work with you and your candidates. Next slide, please. So acceptable supports, things that we can do. Those are all the things we must do, right? These are all the things we can do. Guiding discussions about the TPA. Providing support documents about making good choices. One struggle that candidates had in my program was around how to integrate ELD. So I spent a lot of time giving folks a lot of different resources and samples and experiences and videos of how other people integrated ELD. So when it came their turn, they had a lot to draw from. Also, keeping a bank of teacher performance assessments that other candidates had submitted. So I had more examples that were more recent and that were in their context. That was very helpful. And once you can do that. You can ask your candidates to give you their stuff to share with other candidates, as long as you get permissions. Asking probing questions. This one right here. Do you think you did it? How does this look? Do you think you met this expectation? How? And again, from there, you can know where to guide a candidate, right? There's some things that we just have to teach folks, but in this space, they have to do the learning, right? They can't be a passive learner, no sitting, getting, because they'll just be forgetting. They have to be the active participant. The electronic platforms, we're trying to, that was one of the big things about going to a commentary versus annotations, right? It was the electronic platform. We're trying to make sure, but understanding there's the e-portfolio system that you have to go on and register. This one, right, drives me nuts. Candidates go in there and register, and they just register for something they don't even know what it is. I'm like, you got to register for the right assessment. What credential are you getting? And I get that question from people, and they're like, I don't know. I was like, well, okay, if you close your eyes and you look out, like, what do the kids look like? Or who are they in front of you that you're serving? And then they can describe. I'm like, oh, okay, so general education, second grade classroom. That's what you're doing? Okay, that's multiple subject credential. So just ensuring they know what program they're in. I know that sounds beyond, but that is something that happens where candidates get confused. And when they go and register, they register from the wrong area. It could cause delays in getting their scores. And then also arranging for technical assistance. I think that a lot of folks know how to use and make videos at this point, but there are still some folks that don't necessarily have access to that technology. So finding that resource. When I was at UC, we used to have these student assistants that would come and hang out and sit in the lobby area from a certain time to a certain time before all the classes, and candidates could bring their videos and they would help them to get them to, they didn't edit it, they didn't upload it, they didn't do all that. What they did is they showed them how to do it themselves. And it's an important skill that they'll be able to use in their teaching. So supporting folks with that video portion, very important. Next slide, please. Okay, so stuff you can't do, right? You're not the person to edit their stuff. I had a candidate email me all their stuff and said, I'm just too busy to upload this. Can you do it for me? I was like, yeah, no, I'm pretty busy myself. So, right, you're not editing their stuff. You can have a conversation with it. They can have their screen, they can be sharing, you can be talking, and they can be editing their stuff. That's perfectly fine. But you going in and writing their stuff for them? No. Providing a specific critique of a candidate response that indicates an alternative response prior to its submission. Okay, so this is where, you always got to let your conscience be your guide. You see something here and you're like, you know what? No, this isn't going to work. Why don't you do this? Now, at that point, it's you doing the performance assessment for them. It's not the candidate. if you ask them a question, do you think that this meets the requirements of this? And they're like, oh yeah, sure, I think it's great. Okay, well, let's talk about this. Let's have a deeper conversation. But again, if you say, no, this won't meet, do this instead, that's where you're kind of stepping over the line of doing this assessment for the candidate. We really want this to be their work and their development as a teacher. And I'm 21, 22 years into my career in education. If you had gone back and talked to me in about 2003, 2004, I would have been a lot thinner and still just as charming, but not necessarily as skilled in some of these pieces. And so I've learned and grown over time. And this is supposed to be like a very minimal starting point for some of these folks. And all candidates require a different amount of support, and you know what they need because you are the ones closest to them. Telling candidates which video clips to select, watching the video with them having a conversation. Do you think that this one would be a good one to submit? And you say, well, if you think it, do you think so? Well, yeah, I think so. Well, why? Can you tell me? Okay, well, here's this right there. I didn't tell them to submit that. They said, oh, I think this will be good. And I agreed with them because they pointed out the evidence. And I saw the evidence too. Perfectly fine. I didn't go through their video and say, here, from this clip to this clip, this is gold right here. This is how you're going to pass, right? We want the candidates to really look at their work, identify their work. What are they doing right? And submit that way. And uploading the candidates' responses, right? It's just, yeah, putting it anywhere, public access. A lot of times people sign these permission slips. I had a student teacher in my son's class, and he was like, I don't want to be in a video. And I was like, we're signing this because you're helping her pass her stuff. All right, you better behave. But truly, we want to make sure that we're protecting those parents' rights, that their children are captured in these videos. They're not being put anywhere publicly. And a lot of candidates are finding stuff on the internet, Teachers Pay Teachers, different places, and they need to be careful and read the attestations that they sign when they submit their assessments, and just be cognizant of what they can and cannot publish. And truly, we are being protective of vulnerable children, youth, other adults that did not sign up to have their video on YouTube, things of that nature. So that's why it's an unacceptable thing, putting stuff on social media or public access websites. Next slide, please. Okay, sorry, that was a whole lot of me chit-chatting, and I'm sure there's questions. So maybe we can go through in the chat, or Heather and Julie, I'm sure that you have been just like typing away while I was chit-chatting away. So anything for me to answer?
Yeah, I think this is just a good one for, well, there's a lot of good questions, but this is a good one for discussion, thinking about the order of the cycles to engage in, especially when candidates take their literacy class. And I really think that this is up to the program. This is where your all best judgment comes in about the design of your program. And a lot of programs have typically engaged in cycle 1 first and then cycle 2, but it really could be done in either order. But I think with the literacy class, you have to think about, is it more helpful for the candidates to have that knowledge before they engage in the literacy cycle, or to be getting it at the same time they're engaging in the literacy cycle? And that would just be a question I would pose to you. I don't know the design of your coursework or how it's laid out, but that would just be something I would think about when you go to maybe make those decisions. And I don't know if any Marissa or Julie, you want to add to that.
Just to echo it for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
And then just to go back and make sure that we have covered everything. We had a question about samples, and we are definitely going to be working on getting sample submissions out to the field as soon as we can. But one of the things that prohibits us from getting them out there in a more timely manner to you all is that they have to meet the ADA accessibility standards to be posted on the commission's website. And that is a lengthy process for us to get that there for you all. And so we are going to do our best, but it just takes some time to get it to that point where it is accessible to everybody who might need to access it. And so we will do our best to get them there, but we don't know how long that will take.
Oh, Kelly, you ask a great question, and it's not granular at all. Just the preferred terminology, referring to cycle 1 and LPA or MPA, LPA, wondering what the above discussion about sequence of the two ways to clarify the language. We've gone back and forth with ourselves on this very issue. So we are referring to what was cycle 1 will be the math cycle, but you could call it the MPA, but you can, or math cycle. And then what was literacy, cycle 2 will be the literacy cycle, or you can call it the LPA. So I think it'll evolve over time as we decide if the field wants to call this MPA, LPA, or math cycle, literacy cycle, but that's how we are referring to it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We also had questions about, the field test informing changes for the operational versions, and it's driven by the data that we receive from scoring, from the surveys that are given to our candidates that participate, the programs, the coordinators, the cooperating teachers, and our assessors. And they also participate in focus groups, all 4 of those groups. And we use that to determine any changes. We also use it to determine what we keep. So it's not just changes. If they're like, we love this, then we also are like, oh, okay, good. Like, then we should keep going this direction. Or if a rubric scores well, or we're seeing strong data in an area. So it's not just what to change, it's also what to keep. And so if anybody is really interested to kind of see what that looks like, I did put the link to the pilot item in the chat. And so you can kind of look at how the pilot evolved into the field test, and if any of you I know there's some of you here who have participated in the pilot or the field test process. And so you've kind of seen what that looks like and how we use that information to guide that process. And we also had a question about passing scores, which is great. So in both field tests, the passing standard set by the commission was 14 points, no side conditions, which means no more. There was no more than one score of 1 condition included. But the commission will set operational passing standards. We don't yet know for sure when the math cycle passing standards will be proposed for everything. That is still to be determined, because we have an extended field test also running right now for math for some of our areas. But for sure, the literacy passing standard will be proposed at the June commission meeting. And so the commission will make a determination then.
I saw Elizabeth's question in the chat, and this was one that I got a lot, where when we were talking about instructional, let's say this candidate needs to put in English language development, they said, well, I'll just have them do a think, pair, share, because then they're talking to each other. And what I would say is, well, what are the English language development needs of the students? Look at your data. What did you collect? Is it a reading, writing, speaking, listening? How is that being, how, and basically asking them the why and the how questions. And in that conversation, I might find out that this candidate only knows 1 or 2 strategies. And so here are 3 strategies that would meet the requirements because you said in your data that they need to be expressively communicate with one another. And so asking the candidate the why and the how, and then recognizing if it's not there, like if the information is not there, then providing them with those resources, and then coming back to that conversation after they've had a chance to internalize and think about these pieces. So I'm not a big, strong believer in giving someone just like a whole big old book and say, here, read it and teach yourself. That's not what we're here for. And that's not what we have time for a lot of times with candidates, especially if they're trying to put something into a learning, objective or an observation for the next week. But asking them why they made an instructional decision, how it's going to be is this what you think is going to move these kids forward? If you had to justify this at a parent-teacher conference when mom and dad or grandma is asking you lots of questions about this instructional decision, is this what you would say? Those kinds of questions to someone, to pose that, you know, it's an important thing so they can justify their answer, and then do a little bit of research, and that action research turning around with those, and that way you know what to give them to move them forward. So does that kind of answer? Okay.
And then Lori, your question is a good question about are the assessments being developed to take into consideration a lack of need for a secondary passing standard and just have a passing standard? That's a really good question. But SB 1263 is pretty explicit about the commission maintaining a secondary passing standard. So I think the commission will probably take that into consideration when adopting the passing standard, but we don't know what they will determine when we present that information. Yeah, so I'm noticing our time, so we just have two more quick slides. And one is that if you would like to learn more about the LPA, a great way, we call it the LPA in the field test, sorry, that's confusing and I need to not do that anymore. The literacy cycle. So if you want to learn more, we are still accepting applications for field test assessors. And so if you would like to join us in scoring candidate submissions and going through that assessor process, we would love to have you apply and come along with that. So scoring will take place in April and May. The specific dates vary based on credential area. But yeah, come along on that work. It's a great way to learn more about the contents of the assessment, the rubrics, the scoring process, what candidates produce when they engage with this assessment. And we would love for you to join us.
And if you are interested in our next steps for the development of this work, because it's been about a 2-year process from pilot to field test to development. Here are those dates, and just if you're interested in what's coming up at the April Commission meeting, we'll be presenting the full results of the fall math cycle, the PK3 and the 3 ed specialist areas, or 2 ed specialist areas, early childhood and VI. Also, you can check out, I don't know that those links are on there. Okay, but they are on the commission website. And you can always go to those and click on that and open up those agendas. We have the CalTPA Literacy Performance Assessment Field Test. We have that in progress right now this spring. We have over 300 candidates participating. The full results of the CalTPA Literacy Cycle, the LPA field test study, will be available at the June Commission meeting, so tune in for that. And the full results of the extended math cycle field test for PK3, as well as deaf and hard of hearing, will be presented at the June Commission meeting. And we go live with the new CalTPA Math and Literacy cycles this fall. Again, those items will be available for candidates to register and download as of August 26th, and we will get you watermark drafts as soon as they are ready this summer. And we want to thank you so much for your attendance today. This is so important. I hope that this gives you a little peek into what's coming down the road. We will continue to communicate with all of you as soon as we know it and send you updates. You can always reach us at the CalTPA at ctc.ca.gov email address, or you can email literacy at ctc.ca.gov.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.